Hello, dear students. I welcome you all on behalf of Sri Jayendra Rank Zone classes. Dear student, we are in a continuation of the chapter that is biodiversity and conservation. Biodiversity and conservation, and in this, how we are going to conserve biodiversity that we are going to discuss today. In the previous lecture, we have already talked about what is diversity, what diversity is there in Earth, what is the diversity ratio on the particularly India, what are the reasons for the loss of diversity, causes of loss of diversity. Okay, that we have all things we have discussed. But how we are going to conserve the biodiversity? That is one of the important tasks. Okay, after discussing the problem, we have to identify the solution. So here we are going to discuss the solution of conservation of a biodiversity. So, why should we conserve biodiversity? That is the first question that we have to address. So, dear student, we know that ecosystem are undergoing a change due to several factors. Every day, the ecosystem is going into some change, and that is due to several factors like pollution, invasion of species, overexploitation by humans, climate change, etc. And most people are beginning to recognize that diversity at all levels, that is genetics, species, and ecological, is important and needs to be conserved. Okay, biodiversity conservation is necessary because why it is necessary that we have discussed how we will conserve that we will discuss in this part. So first question is why should we conserve biodiversity? Obviously, if we are getting something, then only we are going to conserve this. Humans are greedy, particularly selfish people. They will conserve the things that is important for them. Otherwise, they will not conserve. Otherwise, they will exploit. Exploit. That is the nature of the human. So there are many regions, all equally important to conserve biodiversity, and the regions which are all equally important for the conservation of biodiversity are grouped into three categories. That is narrowly utilitarian. That is narrowly utilitarian. Okay, means which have economic importance. Broadly utilitarian, which include the ecosystem services and the ethical aspect. So this narrowly utilitarian or economic importance, economic uses, or we can say which has a direct uses in our life, that are narrowly utilitarian. So whatever the thing we get from the ecosystem or biodiversity in the benefit way, that we are going to consume. So first, whatever the things which human derive directly economic benefits from the nature, that will be grouped under the narrowly utilitarian aspect. So first, when we talk about the narrowly utilitarian aspect, it is a economic importance or it has a direct uses, and human derive countless direct economic benefits from the nature. If we talk about some of the example, Pinus is there, Abyss is there, Boswellia is there. Boswellia, if you will not remember, then it's okay. But Abyss and Pinus are important sources of the paper. Okay, so they are important sources of paper. So paper can be directly we have a direct use of it. So it comes under the narrow utilitarian, and this we get from the particularly biodiversity. Pine resin is obtained from the pinus and the dammer from the Shoria robusta. That is also important. Apart from this, we obtain some of the gums. That is a Kutira gum. That is a Stellaria ures. No need to remember the scientific name. Bengal kino gum. This particular things you no need to remember. Salar, Safed, Dora, and gum arabic. These all things are not need to remember. You should remember that gum come under the what narrowly utilitarian aspect, and it has the direct uses. Tannin sources are there. Uncaria, leaves of younger branches, acacia, jubilance bark, this wood and fruits. This is all the direct economic importance. Then important dyes are obtained like catch, kattha, and that is hardwood of acacia, catechu. Then hemoxylon. These all are the particularly dyes. So important dyes we can obtain. Plants can also be manufactured inhibitory synthetic products called the chemicals that all can also be exploited. Now, apart from this, in narrowly utilitarian, several other aspects are also included. So, in this narrowly utilitarian aspect, apart from these things, we obtain food. So, okay, so food, all the food that we eat comes from the plant and animals, like cereals, pulses, fruit, eggs, meats, etc. Apart from this, firewood, that is a source of energy for cooking and heating. Then apart from fibers, we obtain like jute, flax, hemp, cotton, coir. These are the sources of natural fibers. Then construction material, that is wood, which is used as a timber, used as timber in construction work, furniture, sport goods, etc. Then industrial products, and industrial products like tannins, lubricants, dyes, resins, perfumes, paper, rubber. These all are the industrial products that is obtained from the plant. Okay, so these all things are obtained from the plant and they comes under a direct use or economic uses. So they become a part of natural utility. And this many things we obtain from the biodiversity or from the nature. And in that we also obtain some of the drugs like morphine, which we obtain from the dried latex of unripe capsules of a Pavar somniferum, that is opium plant, and it is used as an analgesic, that is a pain reliever. Okay. Now, apart from this, quinine is one more drug which is obtained from the bark of Cinchona latinana, and that is obtained against used against the malaria, that is anti-malarial. Then artemisinin obtained from the Artemisia annua plant, that is also anti-malarial drug. Then Taxol, this we have studied importantly, and you should remember this. It is obtained from the bark of yew, that is the Texas tree, and it is also anti-cancerous drug. Then vincristine and vinblastine, which are a rosy periwinkle, obtained from the rosy periwinkle, that is Vinca rosea or the Catharanthus rosea, and it is also anti-cancerous. Reserpine, that is obtained from the roots of Rauwolfia serpentina. This you should remember, and it is obtained from the medicine for the meds. It are used against the high blood pressure, schizophrenia, and painful bowels. Apart from this, Vasaka is obtained from the leaves of Adathoda vasaica, that is used against the bronchitis, and licorice, that is the roots of Glycyrrhiza abrugabra, that is used against the bronchitis. Okay, so these all things are obtained from as a particularly from these sources, and this is their application. So you should remember the drug and their application. Okay, now, so these drugs and in this many drugs, it is considered that more than 25% of the drugs currently sold in the market worldwide are derived from the plants. More than 25%. And 25,000 species of plants contribute to the traditional medicine used by the native. 25,000 species of plants used contributed in this production of this particular species. Okay, and many more medicinally useful plants, specifically in tropical rainforest, waiting to be explored. And this 25% drug which we are obtained, that is obtained from the 120 species of plant only. Okay, this 25% drug from 120 species of plant obtained and sold in the market. Apart from this, bioprospecting, that is exploring molecular, genetic, and species level diversity for the products of economic importance, is going on vigorously. Nation with rich biodiversity are expected to reap enormous benefit from this. Okay, so that is the thing about the narrowly utilitarian things. Now, apart from this, the another use or another reason for the conservation of biodiversity is broadly utilitarian aspects or its ecosystem services use. So ecosystem services are important and that nature provides obviously. So biodiversity play a major role in many ecosystem services that nature provides. First is the Amazon forest. If we talk, estimate about 20% of the total O2 in the Earth atmosphere through the photosynthesis. So 20% of the total O2 in the Earth that is released through the Amazonian forest. Okay. So if we talk about the oxygen, plants are replenishing oxygen of the atmosphere due to photosynthetic activity, and Amazonian forests play a major role in this. Apart, there's the ecosystem services that nature provides, that is the pollination. And we know that a number of organisms like bees, bumblebees, birds, bat are involved in pollination of the plants, which is essential for the formation of the fruits and seeds. So pollination will occur, then the fruits and seeds are produced. So if human perform this duty, the cost would be many billion dollars, and it is saved by the use of these pollinators. Apart from this, another ecosystem service that nature provides, that is a flood and erosion control. Okay, biodiversity also help in flood and erosion control. We know that plant root hold the soil particles against a moving wind. They adhere to the soil particle and they hold the soil particle, that is the plant root, against the moving wind and water, and thus prevent the soil erosion. Plants also increase the porosity of soil, thereby allow water to percolate down in the soil, and they help to retain the water and prevent a runoff for the water. These plants, or in flood erosion control, they prevent the runoff of water, rainwater, or loss of rainwater to the ocean. Litter and humus of the plant act as a sponge, retaining most of the rainwater, that is humus and the litter. As the soil is porous, the retained water percolates downward and is stored in underground water. So, because of this, the nature provides a flood and erosion control. That is also one of the direct ecosystem services that nature provides. And apart from this, we get some aesthetic pleasure as well. And in that, biodiversity has a lot of aesthetic and attraction value. It provides a lot of pleasure. If we are walking through the thick woods, watching spring flowers in full bloom, or walking up to a bulbul song in the morning, that all things we give us some aesthetic pleasure. That is also one of the important ecosystem service that nature provides. Okay, so that is the broadly utilitarian aspect, that all these are in a broadly utilitarian aspect of ecosystem service. And the last aspect which we are going to discuss here, that is the ethical aspect. Now, dear student, we remember that there are a million of plant, animal, and microbial species who evolved just as we have evolved and are sharing the planet with us, obviously. No organism is useless. Sometimes we kill the insects, okay, but this insects has some value also. So, no organism is useful. Every species has an interesting value. Every species has an intrinsic value. Though it may not be direct use of it, it is therefore our moral or ethical duty not to destroy them, because each species are not a single species is useless. So instead, we should take care of their well-being so as to pass the rich biological legacy to the future generations. Same what we got from the nature, that we have to give to our future generations. So every species has intrinsic value. So it is our moral duty to take care of that well-being. Okay. So for the what a passing of the biological legacy to the future generation we need to conserve. So this is the what reasons for conservation. Okay, why should we conserve biodiversity? Now, how do we conserve biodiversity? That question we need to answer. So if we answer that question, that how do we conserve biodiversity? So that can be particularly conserved in a different way. First thing, we are going to discuss about the concept of threatened species, which is given by the International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, that is IUCN. Okay. So IUCN given a concept of threatened species, and that has classified the rare species of the plant and animals into different categories for the purpose of conservation. Now we remember that this IUCN, that is International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, which is now called World Conservation Union. This is now called WCU, that is World Conservation Union. In this World Conservation Union, WCU, its headquarter at Morges, Switzerland. Okay, and this IUCN has a role to maintain a red data book or a red list, which is a catalog of threatened plant and animal species are facing a risk of extinction. And this given a concept of threatened species. Now here they classified the rare species of the plant and animals into different categories. Now classification is based on what are the basis of this classification. Then the distribution of species in the past and present. What is the distribution of them? The decline in the number of population of in course of time. The abundance and quality of natural habitat and the biology and potential value of that species. Based on this, they are going to classify into a particular different groups. Now, IUCN Red List category is there, and IUCN Red List is a catalog of taxa that facing the risk of extinction. We are going to categorize them and put them in a different groups. And it is important to understand that the Red List aim to impart information about the urgency and the scale of conservation problem. Means it give us a alarm that we need to conserve urgently this particular species, otherwise it will lose in a few years. So that gives such one important alarm that is for the to the public and the policymaker as well. Now, what are the uses of this red list? What is the red list? How they are categorized? That we will discuss. But what is the uses of the red list, which has a particular taxa or species name which are facing the risk of extinction? So this red list help us to develop awareness about the importance of a threatened biodiversity. Means which is facing the risk of extinction. What is the importance of that? That we can develop awareness about that. Then identification, documentation of endangered species. Whatever the endangered species are there, we have to identify and document them. Then provide a global index of the decline of biodiversity. What is the global index of declining of the biodiversity that we have discussed? And ultimately defining conservation priorities at the local level and guiding conservation action. How we are particularly going to conserve, we have to prioritize it and we have to make a proper actions. Now this World Conservation Union, which is recognized 8 red list categories of species. World Conservation Union, which is IUCN, that has 8 categories of species. One is extinct, then extinct in the wild, critically endangered, vulnerable, lower risk, data deficient, and not evaluated. These 8 categories was given. Now it is also known that the list of endangered plants in India include orchid, especially a blue. Endangered is one category. Okay, so list of endangered plant if we talk, what are they? We will discuss. There is a blue vanda, most of the tree ferns, pitcher plant, that is nepenthes, and the podophyllum. These all are the particularly endangered. Pitcher is an endangered. If you don't remember major thing, you should remember about the orchid and the nepenthes. These are the endangered species. Now, if we talk about this categories, 8 categories, first category is the extinct. Now, what do you mean by extinct? First, that we have to discuss. So, if any taxon is there that is extinct or any species is extinct, when we call it as when there is a no reasonable doubt that the last individual has died. Means if we do not have a slight doubt also, we are sure that any single individual of that particular species are not available on this earth, then we put that particular species in the extinct group. Second category is extinct in the wild. Extinct in the wild means according to record, the exhaustive surveys have done, and according to record, that particular species is placed in the group of extinct. But after putting in a group of extinct, we found one particular individual of that species in particular area. So according to record, it is extinct, but in reality, it is not extinct. Then we call it is extinct in the wild. So taxon is extinct in the wild when exhaustive survey is known or and or expected habitats have failed to record an individual. Okay, they have failed to record individual. They have failed to observe that a single individual still exists, and they have kept it in the extinct. Then we put them again in the extinct, the wild. Then third, critically endangered. A taxon is critically endangered when it is facing an extremely high risk of extinction in the wild in the immediate future. Means in the immediate future, if it is going to, it is the high risk of very high risk of extinction. It is going to be lost in the immediate future. Then we call it as a critically endangered. And fourth group is endangered. A taxon is endangered when it is facing a very high risk of extinction in the near future. If in the near future it is going to be extinct, then we call it as endangered. Then the fifth group is vulnerable. A taxon is vulnerable when it is not critically endangered or endangered, means it is not going to be lost in the immediate future or near future, but it is facing high risk of extinction in the wild in the medium term future. Okay, medium term future. Then lower risk. A taxon is at lower risk when it is evaluated and does not satisfy a criteria of critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. If it is not particularly satisfying this area, then we call it as at the lower risk. Data deficient. If a one taxon is a species that whose data is deficient, when there is inadequate information how to make a direct, indirect, or assessment of its risk of extinction, then we cap it in the data deficient. And eighth is not evaluated. Taxon is not evaluated when it has not yet been assessed against the above criteria. Now, in this, the threatened species which are having a face risk of extinction, if we put them, then threatened species include critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable species. So this is the what a particular formula we can derive from this. Okay, so that is the thing. Okay, so I hope you understood that they can be get extincted in a near about or in a medium term or in the upcoming future. Now, if we take our examples of the threatened species in India, then threatened species in India, and if we categorize that is the critically endangered, endangered, vulnerable, then the critically endangered plant species, if we talk, that is Barbarous nilgarins, that is a tree which is placed in the group critically endangered. It is going to be lost in the immediate future. And in animals, such salvinus, that is known as pygmy hawk, that is also critically endangered. Apart from the second group is endangered, which is going to be lost in the near future. And in this, Bentechia nicobarica is the particular plant species, and Elurus fulgens is a red panda, that is also particularly an example of the animal which is going to face the endangered. And third is a vulnerable, which include the Cupressus cashmeriana and the antelope cervicipa, that is a black bug as a animal. Okay, so this is the particularly group. Now we remember in this endangered category, there are much more plant and animal species. So if we add along with the Bentechia nicobarica, we can add blue vanda, that is orchid, then Nepenthes we have discussed about the Rauwolfia serpentina, that is also an endangered species. Then Cycas, one Cycas species, that is a Cycas bedomei, and sandalwood. This all are plants which are facing a near future risk of extinction, that is endangered species. And animal also, if we talk about them, then in animal apart from the red panda, you will see the Asiatic lion, then giant panda, then one horned rhinoceros, then hangul. This was the question which was asked already in Neet. We remember hangul, that is a Kashmiri stag. Important. Okay, apart from this, Indian elephant is also endangered species. Then tiger is also an endangered species. Indian bustard and Siberian crane. Indian bustard and Siberian crane are a particular endangered animal species. Okay, so that is the what a particular group of the threatened species. Now, so why do we conserve biodiversity? That we have already discussed. Okay, okay, so that is our how do we conserve biodiversity. In that first answer we have given, and another answer we are going to discuss that how do we conserve biodiversity, and in that we are going to discuss some facts. Now, in biodiversity conservation, there should be a in situ conservation or ex situ conservation. In situ conservation means the conservation of a particular plant or animal species on their own site, means where they are found in that place also. If they are going to be conserved, then it is a in situ conservation. But if they are taken from their original habitat and placed in another habitat, and if there they are going getting conserved, then it is to ex situ conservation. Now in in situ conservation, there is a protected area networks are there. In that we talk about the second group, second lake, biosphere reserve, national park, wildlife safari sanctuaries. That all comes under the in situ conservation, and we are going to discuss this wildlife sanctuaries, national parks and biosphere reserve, second group and second lake in detail. And in ex situ conservation, which is from the off-site conservation, if you talk, this is on-site conservation. Then in ex situ conservation, we will discuss second plant, home gardens, seed bank, okay. Then field gene bank, cryopreservation, botanical garden, arboretum, zoological park, and aquaria. This all comes under the what ex situ conservation. Now, in this, first we are going to talk about the in situ conservation or on-site conservation strategies, and the in situ conservation emphasize protection of the total ecosystem. It emphasizes the protection of total ecosystem. The in situ approach includes the protection of a group of a critical ecosystem through the network of protected areas. So it is a protection of a group of a typical ecosystem through the network of protected areas. Okay. And in that in situ conservation, we emphasize on the whole ecosystem. Okay. And here we try to conserve the biodiversity at all levels. It means we save the entire forest to save the tiger. However, many nations find it unrealistic and economically not feasible to conserve all the biological wealth. Invariably, the number of species waiting to be saved from the extinction far exceeds the conservation resources. Whatever the conservation resources compared to that, the number of species that are waiting to be saved, that is far more. So, on a global basis, this problem has been addressed by eminent conservationists, and in situ conservation strategies are of two types, that is hotspot and protected area. So this in situ conservation strategies is are of two types, that is hotspots and second protected areas. First, we are going to discuss the hotspots. Now, protected areas also we will discuss some of the main benefits of protected areas, that is a maintenance of a well viable population of all the native species and subspecies. Maintenance of population, that protected area will help maintaining the number and distribution of communities and habitat, conserving the genetic diversity at all the present species, preventing man-made introduction of alien species, means alien species introduction. So ultimately this is trying to conserve the what a particular site, a particular area, and making it possible for a species to shift in response to the environmental changes. So by this is they are particularly trying to conserve the diversity in a particular area. So in that protected areas we will discuss, but first we have to discuss the hotspot. So this concept of hotspot, this concept, if we talk, was developed to designate priority areas for in situ conservation. And this concept developed by Norman Mayers, and this was the neat question. They have asked that which scientist developed this concept. So Norman Mayers was the scientist who developed this particular thing. Now this hotspot that was developed to designate priority areas for in situ conservation, the hotspot are richest and the most threatened reservoirs. Be remember, hotspot. These are the richest and most threatened reservoirs. Most threatened reservoirs of plant and animal life animal life on earth. Okay, so they are the richest and most threatened reservoirs, means it has a plant and animal species which are most threatened. Now if we are calling a particular area as a hotspot, okay, we are calling it as a hotspot for the in situ conservation, then what are the criteria for determining a hotspot? So if we talk about the key criteria of determining A hotspot for determining hotspots, then that are number one, that particular area should have very high level of species richness. Very high level of species richness must be there in that particular hotspot area. Second, high degree of endemism. High degree of endemism means must be there. Endemism means localization. Okay, so in endemism, species confined to that region and not found anywhere. Then we are going to call it as the endemic species. So that should have an endemic species. That should be a particular species of that particular area, which we are calling a hotspot. And the degree of threat, which should be the criteria, which is measured in terms of habitat loss. Measured in terms of habitat loss. So it should have a degree of threat, means should be a threatened species. Okay, then also only we are going to determine a hotspot particular area by this particular category criteria. Now, it was considered that initially 25 hotspots were identified globally. 25 hotspots were identified globally. But now number is raised to 34. But now number is raised to 34, means 9 are new added one. So total 34 hotspots are now there and 9 were added new. Now this 34 hotspots occupy Earth's less than 2% of land area. Less than 2% of land area, you will see the particularly presence of this hotspot. And the number of species they collectively harbor is extremely high, and strict protection of this hotspot would reduce the ongoing mass extinction by almost 30%. So the number of species the number of species collectively they harbor so this is the number of species they collectively harbor is extremely high, is extremely high, and strict protection of this hotspot and strict protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing mass extinction by almost 30%. Now, if we talk about India, we are Indians, so we should talk about the India. So now it is known that India has three hotspots. Has three hotspots. Number one, that is Western Ghat in Sri Lanka. So it has three hotspots. Number one, Western Ghats in Sri Lanka. When we talk about a Western Ghat in Sri Lanka, this particular hotspot occur along the western coast of India. Western coast of India. They occur along the western coast of India and passes through Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala, extending over to Sri Lanka. Extending over to Sri Lanka. Okay. So this is the Western Ghat and Sri Lanka, where you will see the biodiversity. That is one of the important biodiversity hotspot. Now in this southern Western Ghat, southern Western Ghats are known as Malabar, and the August Malay Hills, the Silent Valley, and New Amambalam Reserve and New Amambalam Reserve. They are major centers of diversity. Major centers of diversity. Okay, this Silent Valley and Gasmala Hills are located in the Kerala regions. Okay, so that is the first Western Ghat in Sri Lanka extending this part of this India that represent a first biodiversity hotspot, that is Western Ghat and Sri Lanka. Now, second biodiversity hotspot is Indo-Burma. Now, this extends from it extends from Bhutan to Myanmar, covering most of the northeastern India. Most of the northeastern India. There you will see one another hotspot, that is Indo-Burma. And third hotspot is Himalaya region. And the Himalaya, it is considered as one of the richest hotspot of diversity. It is one of the richest hotspots of biodiversity. And these are the three particular what a hotspot, important one in India. Now we remember hotspots include nearly 25% of plants species, and 20% of human population lives there. Okay, so this is the what particularly seen in the hotspot. Okay, so that is all about the what hotspot. Three hotspot are India. Total 34 are there, which cover the less than 2% area. After hotspot, we are going to talk about the protected areas, and these are the areas on a land or a sea, especially dedicated to protection and maintenance of the biological diversity and of natural and associated cultural resources. Okay, so protection and maintenance of biological diversity along with the natural and associated cultural resources, and these are managed through the legal and other effective means. Okay, and the examples of protected area, if we talk, then it include the national park, wildlife sanctuaries, then biosphere reserve, then sacred groves, lake, sacred lake, and plants. These all are going to be discussed in this particular part. If we discuss this in detail, first we are going to talk about the discussion of the national park. We have heard about it. The national park are there, but what are that? What things are allowed? What it is that we have to discuss properly. So if we talk about national park, these are the areas maintained by government. These areas maintained by government and and reserved for betterment of wildlife. Reserved for betterment of wildlife, that is flora and fauna both. Okay, so these are maintained by government and they are reserved for the betterment of both wildlife, that is flora and flora. Now in national park, it is known that India has 90 national parks. So there are 90 national park in India. And in this national park, there are the somewhat protected areas which are maintained by government and for the betterment of wildlife, that is flora and fauna. And in this, it is known that in national park, grazing, then felling of trees, habitat manipulation, and cultivation are not allowed. Means where we are not going to disturb it more. Okay. So in this, we remember disturbances like grazing, felling of trees, habitat manipulation, and cultivation are not allowed. And if we talk about a national park, earliest national park, if we talk that earliest national park is the Yellowstone in USA. Yellowstone in USA, and the Royal near Sydney National Park near Sydney, Australia, were selected for their scenic beauty and recreational value. Were selected for their scenic beauty and recreational values. Okay, for this, these two are known. In national park, we remember that Jim Corbett National Park is the first national park established in India. Jim Corbett National Park is the first national park established. Okay, so that is the national park. Now, second, we are going to discuss the wildlife sanctuaries. Now, see, in national park, we have trying to conserve both flora and fauna, but in sanctuaries, only fauna are going to be protected. So, sanctuaries, these are the tracts of lands where animals or fauna are protected from. हेलो. हाँ बोलो बोलो बेटा. क्या क्या. हेलो. हाँ बेटा बोल. मैं ऑफिस बेटा आ ही रहा हूँ, ठीक है ना, आधे घंटे में पहुंचा, आधे घंटे में कॉल करता हूँ, ठीक है. क्यों. ठीक है. So these are the tracts of lands where animals, fauna fauna are protected from. They are protected from all types of all types of exploitation and habitat disturbances. Okay, so these are the tracts of lands where animals are protected from all types of exploitations and habitat disturbances. In these wildlife sanctuaries, if we talk, then in this one wildlife sanctuaries, it is known that collection of forest products, harvesting of timber, tilling of land, private ownership, etc. are allowed. Okay, so in sanctuaries, we can take care of private ownership, harvest we can do, tilling of land can be done. These all things are provided or allowed in the sanctuaries, but sanctuaries going to conserve only what? They are going to conserve only animals. Now, the third thing in the third protected area is the biosphere reserve. This is the special category of protected area of land or a coastal environment. And these are the special category protected area of coastal environment where tribal people are integral component of the system. In the biosphere reserve, you are going to see that tribal components are the important component of the system. These are representative examples of the natural biome and contain unique biological communities. Okay, these are the representative example of natural biome and they contain unique biological. And the concept of biosphere reserve was launched in 1975 as a part of UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Reserve program, that is MAP program. Under the MAP program, the UNESCO's MAP program, this was launched in 1975. And this deals with the conservation of ecosystem and genetic resources contained therein. And there are 14 biosphere reserve in India. How many biosphere reserve are there? There are 14 biosphere reserve in the India. Now, if we talk about the biosphere reserve, a biosphere reserve look like this, and this has a consist of three zones. The outermost zone is considered as transition zone. The middle one is the buffer zone, and the innermost one is the core zone. Okay, so this core zone is also known as natural zone. Okay, and this natural zone or core zone, if we talk, that is undisturbed and legally protected area. Undisturbed and legally protected areas. So this core zone is the central zone, natural zone, which is undisturbed and legally protected area, okay, or a ecosystem which are not going to be disturbed at all. The buffer zone is the surrounding the core zone, and it is a buffer zone is the area where a research and educational activities are allowed. Research and educational activities are done. So this area is allowed for that. And in transition zone, if you talk, which is the outermost part of the biosphere reserve, outermost part of biosphere reserve, which is an area of active cooperation between area of active cooperation between reserve management and local people. And in this, human settlement is also allowed. And along with this, in this area, it is known that there is active cooperation between the local people and the reserve management. So in this transition zone, activities like settlements, cropping, forestry, recreation, and other economic uses continue in harmony with the conservation goals. So this is the what a particularly biosphere reserve, how it look like. Okay, this has the three zones. The main functions of biosphere reserve, if we talk, they are dealing with the conservation of the organism, then the development of that, and the research and monitoring and education. That is also one of the important purpose of that. A traditional strategy of a protection of biodiversity has been in practice in India and some other Asian countries in the form of sacred forest. Okay, the sacred forest is the fourth protected area. Okay, and it is practiced in some India and Indian Asian countries. In India, sacred forests are located in several parts. And sacred forests, if we talk, they are the, in many cultures, they are the tract of forest which were set aside, and all the trees, wildlife within, they with respect venerated and with respect given a total protection to the wildlife and all the trees. In India, sacred forest or sacred groves are found in several parts of India, that is Karnataka, Maharashtra, Kerala, Meghalaya, etc., and are serving as a refuge for a number of rare and endangered and endemic taxa. Similarly, several water bodies, that is Patri Lake in the Sikkim, have been declared sacred by the people and leading to a protection of aquatic flora and fauna. Okay, so this is the thing where are done. Now, apart from sacred forest, sacred groves are there. Sacred groves, also called the island of pristine forest. These are the tracks. These are the actually tracks which are well set aside, and all the trees and wildlife are with respect given total protection. They are also called island of pristine, and they are found in several parts of India. They are found in forest of Zentia and Khasi, that is Meghalaya. In Meghalaya, they are found. They are found in Ravli regions of Rajasthan, in the Western Ghats, that is Maharashtra and Karnataka, and Sarguja, Chanda, and Bastar areas of the MP, that is Madhya Pradesh. There is a sacred lake in the Pushkar, that is a sacred lake, and Khichiopatal, that is lake in the Sikkim, they are the sacred lake. And apart from this, sacred plants are also there, like the Osimum sanctum tulsi, Eliocarpus floribundus, Ficus religiosa. This Eliocarp, Eliocarpus floribundus is also known as Rudraksh. Okay, so this all are the particularly what given in situ conservation. Okay, now apart from this, we are going to discuss ex situ conservation strategies. Ex situ conservation strategies is off-site or outside their original habitat, they are going to be conserved. And this includes the botanical garden, zoo, gene bank, pollen bank, seed bank, seedling tissue culture, and the DNA banks. Now, in this, it is known that seed banks are the easiest way to store germplasm of the vine. Means we have to store whole seed, then all the genes of this seed can be stored in the form of germplasm of the wild and cultivated plants at a low temperature in cold rooms. Now, ex situ conservation or preservation of genetic research is carried out in the field gene banks. Under the normal growing condition in the gene bank, it can be done. Now, in vitro conservation means in artificially the conservation, especially done by the cryopreservation in the liquid nitrogen, and this liquid nitrogen, which is at a temperature of minus 196 degrees Celsius. So, at minus 196 degrees Celsius, liquid nitrogen, the cryopreservation is done. Particularly useful for the conserving vegetatively propagated crops like potato. It is usually important for the conservation of potato. Now, this cryopreservation is the storage of material by ultra low temperature. Here we are taking a minus 196, it is too much low temperature. And cryopreservation is the storage of such material by this very low temperature, either by very rapid cooling using a storing cells, or by gradual cooling, and simultaneously dehydration at low temperature, that is used for the tissue culture. The material which is going to be stored for a long period or a time is compact, low maintenance refrigeration units. There also this material can be stored. Botanical garden and zoological park are also ex situ conservation. We have discussed in the living world chapter. Arboretra may also have a seed bank. They have seed bank. Tissue culture facilitates other ex situ technologies also. And many of the zoos are conducting captive breeding program. That is also a ex situ conservation. And we remember in that the seed bank, field gene bank, cryopreservation, home gardens, wildlife safari park. This is an NCERT question they ask sometime. Wildlife safari park, that is also an example of ex situ conservation. Okay, so this is all about the ex situ conservation, off-site conservation. After this ex situ conservation, we are going to now discuss the Convention on Biodiversity. And when we talk about the conventions on biodiversity, dear students, biodiversity knows no political boundaries and its conservation is therefore, biodiversity knows no political boundaries and its conservation is therefore a collective responsibility of non-nation. So, conservation of biodiversity is collective responsibility of all nations. And in that, the historic conventions on biological diversity made, and in that, the Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro, that is Brazil, in 1992. And in this Earth Summit, all nations are called to take an appropriate measures for the conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefits. Conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefit was taken. In the follow-up, World Summit was held on sustainable development held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa. And in this World Summit, 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional, and local level. We remember, in World Summit, 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional, and local levels. And these are the convention on the biological diversity. Okay, dear students. So that is all about the conservation goals, and the ex situ and ex in situ conservation. I hope you understood well this all topics, and this is all about the biodiversity and conservation. I hope you understood well. Thank you, everyone.